That's an argument, but the other
yes, it is.
I mean, that's a basically free trade comparative advantage. The Chinese must have a comparative advantage in creating cheap solar panels, so let's let them do it. The problem is the Chinese don't have a comparative advantage in creating solar panels. The Chinese government is willing to go, okay, solar industry or whatever industry, we're going to fund you, we're going to give you free cash. You don't have to ever pay us back. We just want you to win. And then what's the U.S. corporation supposed to do? That's an unfair game at that point. They don't get 90% of their budget free from the U.S. Government, so they can't win. Okay, so now China has the solar industry because they've knocked out all the other competition. What industry are we going to move on to next? Oh, well, agribusiness is looking pretty good. Let's knock out the U.S. agribusiness or whatever.
And that's the government that seems to be doing that direct targeting of certain markets.
Absolutely.
We're hopefully not, our corporations are looking to increase their advantage, not necessarily having a country increasing its advantage. Now, that's a political power play, mind you, a very smart one, because energy, agriculture are your two staples to having your society by the balls.
Right.
So what I'm saying is this is another part of crony capitalism, really not only misconstruing the economic factors, but showing how political interest totally is the word maleficent? Just completely evil in regards to its exchange in the market itself. Because if they're saturating, it shows that not only do they have an interest, their interest isn't providing the world with cheap solar panels, is it?
No, their interest is winning the industry.
Okay, so that's definitely different than, no, okay, never mind.
Yeah.
How do the Chinese citizens feel about that? Their government taking their money and doing this investing?
Because
I'm sure they're not happy, but if they're not happy, they get run over by a tank.
Yeah. So my thing is that capitalism seems to need kind of a freedom, like a freedom of speech needs, because you need to be able to discuss why and who and what you're doing to orchestrate economic endeavors. Whereas over there, it's kind of like, haha, 90% of your money.
Yeah, I think one of the big problems that I have with libertarianism is that I think you can have a relatively strong argument within just a single entity. Just if you take the U.S. by itself, you can make a pretty good argument. And I still don't agree with some of the things, but I'm willing to say, okay, that's a pretty good argument, but it ignores the pressures from outside and from global players and from global corporations and countries that aren't going to play by those rules, that will pick at the weaknesses in the system and take advantage of it for themselves.
So their regulations are really particular to their advantage. And we're asking, hey, stop being so over-regulatory. We want to let the interest of the people kind of make a dictate.
I'll give you a good example of how far this can go. Japan produces tulips. They export tulip bulbs. So does the Netherlands. The Netherlands, I think, is the second largest or the first largest exporter of tulip bulbs, and they wanted to send some of their tulip bulbs to Japan. Japan went, great, we'll love to take your tulip bulbs, but we're going to have to do an inspection on your tulip bulbs, every single one that comes into the country, to make sure they're not defective. The inspection was cutting the tulip bulb in half. What does that do to the product? That makes it absolutely worthless. So every single bulb that came in from the Netherlands got cut in half by Japanese inspectors. So that's the type of games that countries play with each other.
Well, that sounds like they're, again, doing an interest of the country, not necessarily of the people who are
It's the same reason why California can't import rice to Japan. We could sell rice significantly cheaper than what the Japanese farmers do, but it's a country play. They're playing on the level of countries. It's not just.
And that's a regulatory move.
Aren't they trying to save their own farmers?
Yeah, they're trying to say it's like 0.5% of GDP, but they won't let other rice come in, even though it's such a small market, because rice has such an important, culturally significant position in Japanese life that they won't do it.
So the regulation of that, a libertarian would say you need to relax that. Also, like migration, all of these things, so that the free market and the marketplace of ideas can start branching out. It's whenever you have these countries doing these over-regulatory power plays where everybody gets screwed. So it's like regulation begets regulation. You can't even get into the sandbox without having your cards neatly stacked.
Well, it's,
And whenever you go to an economy like that, that's really antithetical to what anybody in the market wants.
Don't libertarians have to admit there are places where you simply have to have regulation, e.g., we're overfishing the oceans like crazy because each boat is out there trying to get the last of the fish. If there's no regulations, we're going to be without fish. You have to have some regulations to have a sustainable crop.
Right, and so we could just say, well, we're going to do embargoes on most everything, you know, and we're going to set up a self-sustaining environment for our country. Why couldn't we do that if we're just going to be
embargo?
Like embargoes are not letting go out, correct? Or not letting
Not
go
letting
in.
go.
That's what I meant.
Or-
So
Not buying their fish.
not buying
it would
anybody's
be-
anything. Just have
Well, but
it.
as long as other countries still buy it, they're still going to do it with the ocean. So unless
Yeah.
everybody agree not to do that.
it's a prisoner's dilemma because,
You're playing hawk every time.
well, if we all agreed, if the U.S. agreed, okay, we want free market, let's get rid of some of these regulations and just let it work itself out, that we would have to assume that the other players in the marketplace, i.e. other countries, other international corporations, would play by the same rules, that they would cooperate with us. But if they decide not to cooperate with us, then they get all of it and we get none of it. If they do cooperate with us, then we get to split it evenly and we can all grow and be better for it. But the incentive to defect in that situation and is just like, why wouldn't I do this? My country is going to be so much better if I can take advantage of the U.S. because they're trying this crazy scheme.
That sounds like game theory, and that presupposes that
It
every
is game
country
theory.
is an egoist in and of itself. And maybe that's where all of the implications come from, is the fact that we want these power plays, like we were talking about this innate guilt that we have, or guilt, this greed rather,
Yeah.
that we have. It seems to me that the problem would be these higher powers with the motive of playing hawk or
And then you have some
wanting to
trade
play this as a
agreements
game
that
theory. I don't see
try to-
economics as a game. I think the only time it's a game is whenever people who, like you and I, are affording their lives, that's the win.
Yeah.
And nobody is constricting their liberties because of it.
Unfortunately, most of the big players see it as a game.
Sorry, this discussion is fascinating, but they're actually going to kick us out pretty soon.
Okay.
Thank you, Professor Anderson.
Okay.